everyone has the right to a positive identity. This is the first generation that we are diagnosing en masse.
That immediate association of it being a very negative thing.
There are a lot of strengths to being autistic, and being an autistic young person isn't necessarily the place where you will find them.
Hi and welcome to This is Autism, the podcast from the North East Autism Society. My name is Kerrie Highcock and I'm the Family Development Manager at the charity. Today I'm joined by the lovely Nic King, a trainer and consultant who runs an organisation called PANDAS Online and provides training for children, young people and their families on what it means to be autistic. Nic is autistic herself and has ADHD and has 2 neurodivergent children. So thanks very much for talking to us, Nic. Just to make sure I got all of that intro right, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I think you were there or thereabouts. I do have a company called PANDAS Online. We do have Neurobears, which is training for autistic children and young people, and just for them. I do train everyone. I'm not literally everyone. Anyone
who will listen.
Anyone who will listen. Anyone who's passionate. People who aren't passionate, but they're a slightly different vibe. So anyone.
Wonderful. So I'm going to go straight into questions for you, Nic. You talk a lot about positive identity when we're working with our children and young people, and of course autistic adults. What are we talking about when we talk about positive identity? What does that mean?
I think everyone has the right to a positive identity. I think being autistic, being neurodivergent is fundamental to who you are, how you experience the world. And I think we could have learned a lot from not helping other minority or marginalised groups have a positive identity about themselves. And I think there is learning there, and I think everyone has the right to a positive identity. Autistic children have the right to a positive self-identity around being autistic. They do.
So do you think, I think I already know the answer to this question, but a lot of the families I work with will say, should I tell my child they're autistic? Is there a right time to do so? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I mean, they need to know. They need to know. There's research out there, only within adults, that finding out while you are younger can have positive mental health outcomes. It's not a huge study. There's not, thousands and thousands of parts of data, because realistically, this is the first generation that we are diagnosing en masse. Why are we doing it if we're not telling them? Why are we diagnosing thousands and thousands of autistic children if we're not telling them? How is it different from our so-called lost generation not being diagnosed? How are we going to make it be different? And I think that starts with telling them.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate for that as well. I think it's really important to know who you are as a person. And I also think there's something around, we take our children to appointments to sit through numerous assessments and talk about everything that's wrong with them often. That's how it's often framed. And yeah. I think there's something about knowing why you are in that process that's really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I don't recommend anyone looks at the DSM criteria because it's awful. But it's about rigidity. It's about being slightly broken. It's about not, it's about being somehow wrong of normal. It's unpleasant, and they hear it, and then we're wondering why they don't have a positive identity. If I had only framed myself within, the DSM criteria, I wouldn't have a positive identity either.
What helped you, Nic, as a later diagnosed person? Was there something around finding your tribe, or what helped you?
No, you see, I think, and this is something that, I talk about in other places. I have neurodivergent privilege, and I do. Our family looked like the adults being diagnosed before the children. And that's very, very different than most people's experience around diagnosis or like self-identification. I also come from a very, very long line of people who understood they were different. So, although my grandfather would be 100 and odd now, and he definitely didn't consider himself within the word autism because at the time there wasn't the word autism, he knew he was different, and he knew that lots of the world didn't work for him. So he did, self-employment. He had a job around his like interests. And I come from a very multi-generational line of that, where we weren't using the word autism, but we had a very sort of clear idea about sort of finding your own path and finding what works for you. And that if that looks different than the majority of people, that's okay. So sort of there's that, in that we were kind of a little bit ahead of the game, and I feel like I get to share that. If you have privilege, share it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I hadn't, so as you know, and I'll give you a plug here, I've been listening to Nic's wonderful podcast, Neurobears Don't Juggle Chainsaws, and actually I hadn't heard of the term before, neurodivergent privilege, until I heard you speak about it, and it really made me think, if you're in that world already where it's okay to be different, it's fine, like that's all right, like let's all embrace difference. And I think you shared a story, Nic, I think it was you or Kate, about where I think it was your granddad or your dad designed the thing for the telephone, so we had like all internal telephone lines in the house.
Yes, we did.
Brilliant, and what a what a creative way of being. And I just think I think that term was just very interesting for me. And I was like, oh, actually, interesting.
I may or may not have made it up myself. There's potential. I do that. But I do. I think there are some neurodivergent people out there who have a level of history and privilege within their families where we aren't the first through to even conceptualize myself as sort of slightly, different to some sort of societal model.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like it a lot. So we believe, both of us, that yes, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Why would you not, explore with your child about them being neurodivergent? But do you think, Nic, there is a right time or a wrong time to share that information?
Oh, maybe. I think it's twofold, isn't it? So obviously we've got significantly long waiting lists, which may result in young people sort of knowing and self-identifying before they're diagnosed, which is good. We have more self-identifying adults, which means it can be more of an average conversation within your household where you talk about sort of neurodivergence and your needs and things like that. We've thought about the fact that when we're sitting in these appointments, it might be a very negative or weird experience at best. I think there is something, and it's part of what I like and want out of Neurobears, there's something about creating space to talk about it. So like I don't want to talk about it in the appointments where we're using negative language. I don't want us to talk about it immediately after meltdowns. I don't want us to talk about it immediately after something's gone wrong at school. I don't want us to talk about it when we're like necessarily in crisis. That definitely shouldn't be the first time we're bringing it up. But also our system in a way works that you might not even get a referral into the system until your young person's in crisis. So you're kind of being forced into these discussions at completely the wrong time. And I feel like just creating that time in a sort of like just a neutral and safe time to talk about it, away from any kind of negatives, deficits, bad experiences for the young autistic person, is where we need to do it. If I had the magic wand, I would like every young person to have Neurobears within like a year to 18 months of being diagnosed or self-identifying, because I think it's important to sort of get in there and build before they start associating it with being a negative thing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and I love the work that you do with Neurobears, but I think there is stuff out there that still is framed very negative. So I've had young people who will get a diagnosis and then will go on Google, for example, and come up with all old horrendous stuff like the triad of impairments. You know, some people are still talking about that. Wow. And then actually completely disassociate from the idea of being autistic, and it kind of put a wall up already. And I've got families that say, you know, my son, my daughter is saying to me, I didn't want this diagnosis. Why did you get this for me? And then that immediate association of it being a very negative thing, because they've not had, like you say, wouldn't it be wonderful if after diagnosis they were signposted or they went on to a wonderful program of self-exploration? But unfortunately, I think there's a big gap for some young people in between, isn't there, where we get on Google and it's all awfulness, some of it. Some of it's good, but a lot of it is not good.
It's sometimes how I describe it within as well, like putting yourself on the right algorithm. So like the right sort of the search terms. So if we think of like language, and that's what we're really fundamentally talking about here. We're talking about a move away from some language associated with autism to the language of like a culture and a community. And within that, that's how we sort of like, we build relationships, we create a sense of community. And it's always been in the feedback that it's incredibly important to the young people that Neurobears was created by autistic people, that it is we and not them, and it is a language of us and not how they are being like perceived. It's the language that we use in our culture, it's a language that we use between ourselves, it's the language that we use in our community, and that's how you create a sense of like belonging. It's how you create a sense of like self-understanding. It's how you create positive identity. It's how they understand that they are not alone, because if they go and Google, one of the first results will still tell them that they are 1 in 700,000, which is not true.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think you're absolutely right, Nic, about language. And I've been on a massive journey with everything in the world of autistic experience, I guess. But one of the things that I've noticed that I've shifted, and this is a tiny thing in language, when we used to deliver training, I would very much say, you know, autistic people, might be wonderful creatively. Let's just use that as a frame of reference. But now I reframe that to say, for those of us who are autistic, and that's a very different message, isn't it? That's saying, for those of us, we are all, you know, let's not other, it's not us and them. And I think that's really important. And that was a very tiny example of how I have shifted language, and it has quite a big impact.
Yeah, and language is, you know, it's everything, and it's changeable as well. It doesn't have to be static. Language, you know, grows and moves and, you know, is fluid, and that's important, because although in theory we're 120 years in, we're still only just at the start of some things about, you know, being autistic. We're really just at the start of autistic people leading autistic research. We're very much just at the start of autistic people delivering the knowledge and the training, and even then there's more work to do there. There's huge amounts of work to do there about sort of privilege, of which I have, you know, some, and identity, and on like intersectionality. We've got huge places to go, and if we sort of, you know, put a line in the sand and say this is it, and that's the end of it. It's got to be movable. It's got to be fluid. And the best way to do that is through language, because it's the easiest thing to change.
Yeah. But has the biggest impact, I think. Has such a big
Absolutely.
impact. Okay, we're going to take a little break, Nic, and then when we come back, we are going to talk about Neurobears and pandas. Hi, while we're on a quick break, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about the Family Development Service here at the North East Autism Society. The Family Development Services provides support for families pre, during and after diagnosis and includes a variety of services, including our parent and toddler groups, autism hubs, workshops for families, a dedicated enquiry line, and our resource site as well, which can be found at the family resource site on the North East Autism Society website. So if you go to www.ne-as.org.uk and go along to the family development site, you can find all the information there. Welcome back to This is Autism. Today we're discussing young people and autistic identity with consultant Nic King. So Nic, I know you have a wonderful programme called Neurobears. Can you tell us what is the aim for Neurobears?
Okay, so Neurobears is the only course for autistic young people, I think, still. Definitely the only one that you can have pre-recorded and just do at home. And it's all about sort of exploring, autism and autistic identity from autistic people. It's essentially like a love letter to my younger self, if you could have known what you know now. And it started with what do they need to know? What do we need to tell them? Because I think it's fundamentally wrong that we have diagnose discharge as a policy here in England, and that we're not telling young people. I can absolutely accept that a lot of adults don't have the knowledge, the words, etc., to tell their young people, to explain it to them. I think that's very, very valid. And I think there is a level where Neurobears is sort of like a learning alongside program as well, and that's great. But it is for young people. Our average user age is 10. And I like the idea of getting to them slightly before they go to secondary school. Before those hormones really hit in and all adults are wrong, which is very developmentally normal. But I like the idea of them having knowledge, and we use all the the proper words. We talk about monotropism, and we talk about the double empathy problem, and we talk about environment and masking and burnout and communication and sort of thinking about just what works for you. I think there's so many tick boxy observational. The observational thing drives me mental, because there was that big push, wasn't there? There was a big push for all behavior is communication. And it's not necessarily. All behavior is open to interpretation. And unless we give these young people like the knowledge about themselves, the words to express themselves, I can't do anything about all the teachers and all the professionals and everybody else in the world. We can't fix that. And it's not going to happen within our generation, possibly the next generation, maybe ever. I don't know. Progress is not linear. But we can give young people an understanding. We can give them the words. We can give them a positive self-identity. And we can do that with bears. Or at least that's what I did.
Yeah. Which leads me to the bears, because they're beautiful. And I can see at the back of you have your lovely bears on which our listeners obviously can't see, but they're wonderful. So why bears, Nic?
Do you know what? Slightly your fault, if we really get back to it. I can remember you, in a very you kind of way, sending me a WhatsApp at the very last minute saying, can you record a video with Zed, who's my eldest child, about autistic identity and first person language? And I was like, yeah, can do, no problem. And I was like, I wanted to talk about how that you can't separate like parts of your body from your autistic identity. And then I was like, well, I can't like pull Zed's ear in this video. So I took a bear down for the video. And I think there was definitely a moment in that where it just literally happened to be the first thing I picked up. And there was definitely a moment there. And then it was a while. It ruminated. And then I had a sort of a moment because I was doing Inside of Autism with Kieran Rose, and everyone was like, we need a child version of this course. And I'm like, cool, that's really easily said. Very difficult to do. And I did definitely just have a moment where I woke up one day and I was like, I can do it with bears. I can absolutely do it with bears. Bears can happen. And then I told Kieran and my husband and Zed, and they were like, you've gone crazy. And then I sort of it came, it's one of these creative things, sometimes stuff just comes out of you. And I did, and I sat and I was like, I can absolutely explain this with bears, and we can think about how different bears have different needs. We can have different bears need different environments, different bears use different types of communication. Yeah, and that was it. And I think I did research bears. There's there was a point where it was going to be different bears, but I think it was always going to be a panda. And it was always going to be a panda. There was always going to be a panda.
We love pandas.
I love pandas. And I think as well, not only have I always loved pandas, and part of the thing where pandas became a thing between me and Kieran and delivering the Inside of Autism. And I had a panda head in my house already that I once wore to a meeting with him.
Yeah, I've seen a screenshot of that somewhere, and it was wonderful. You just sitting as a panda, chatting.
Me sitting as a panda. I think many years ago, me and Kieran were working together, probably on Inside of Autism. And I am not demanding at all. It's not a thing. Don't listen to anyone who tells you no. And Kieran's definitely not demand avoidant, definitely not. And he was avoiding my demand. And he sent me a gif of a panda sort of shaking its hands sort of in a go away kind of way. And then not long after that, we'd had a bit of a tricky week. And I showed up to the meeting wearing the panda head that we had in my house. And it really sort of evolved or devolved, depending, from there, where he then went out and bought the same panda head, and he started to show up to meetings wearing the panda head, and it became a bit of a symbol of making a safe space and working together, and the things that we were doing within that space that felt very good and very positive. So it was always going to be a panda.
So Nic, I know in Neurobears, well, I know in general, you talk about strengths-based models, well, strengths rather than weaknesses and deficits. Why do you think this is important? I mean, we've kind of touched on this throughout this whole podcast, but why is it important that we focus on strengths?
I often think about, it was Boxing Day, and it was one of my uncle's friends who now self-identifies, and he's in his late 70s maybe, and he now self-identifies as autistic and dyslexic. And he told me that when he went to school, he had the option of labelling himself as stupid or lazy. And he knew he wasn't lazy, which left him with stupid. And he did genuinely start to believe that. And I think, we've got a lot of negative labels about people, and we always have. And we need to start sort of moving away from that. There are a lot of strengths to being autistic, and being an autistic young person isn't necessarily the place where you will find them, because you might be stuck in a school system that is not exploring your strengths. You might be stuck in a school system where you're not able to even access your strengths should they be available to you anyway. If you happen to be really good at maths, the environment might still be so difficult that you're not even able to access them. And it's just sort of starting that process about thinking what you might be good at. And I always like it when we get strength stuff back. It's a lot of creativity. It is a lot of maths. It's a lot of gaming, and it's a lot of groups. It's often really quite niche groups that they go to. And there's something in that, because obviously young people don't have the autonomy you get with being an adult. You know, they legally have to go to school, or at least, you know, in the main. Obviously, you can be educated outside of school and stuff like that, but mainly they have to be environments that don't lead to autonomy, that they don't lead to agency, that they don't lead to finding what you are naturally good at. And you know, that can have a huge negative on, you know, how you feel about yourself, how you perceive yourself, particularly when you're talking about tiny people here. You know, they're not even in secondary school. They're little.
I know, we need a lot more positivity. Or
at least neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not trying to sell being autistic as, you know, rainbows, glitter, and unicorns. That's not the deal. But there is room for neutrality. There is room for, you know, this aspect could be great. This could be, you know, this could really work out well for you. And then there's room for, you know, this aspect might be hard, but here's why. And maybe here's where, you know, it'll end, or what you can think about doing as a coping strategy, what you can think about doing, you know, about it. How often are you in that space? Can you be in that space less? You know, start that process of sort of like thinking about where's safe, who's safe, where you're masking, where you don't have to mask, and where you feel like, you know, positive to be yourself, and how much can you be in that space?
1,000,000%. So, Nic, we've spoken a lot about lots of stuff here. And I know you are always super duper busy, but what are your plans for the future? Do you have anything exciting you want to share with us?
I've got loads of exciting things that I'm terrified to share, because then people start wanting us to put dates on them.
You also don't have to share, but I mean, if you've got anything exciting, this is the time. But if you just want to, I mean, we know that you're doing wonderful stuff anyway.
Neurobears research is coming soon, #soon. And that's done and is currently in write-up, depending on when you're listening. Might be out, you never know. And that's been amazing. Neurobears Cubs is coming sooner rather than later, which will be for under 8s. Neurobears for older children is currently being written, but definitely won't be out before 2025. So, taking over the world.
I love Neurobears Cubs. That is such a good name, Neurobears Cubs. Wow. Now that's exciting.
That's yeah. It's short, but it's animated.
Wonderful. So, Nic, if people want to find out about Neurobears, where do they go to?
They go to pandasonline.org, which is my website, but we also have socials. We have Facebook, we have a TikTok, we have LinkedIn. That's not as exciting. And we also have my podcast, which is slightly separate to Neurobears, which is Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws, which has its own website. And yeah, so I'm very findable, very Googleable.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we didn't touch on your new podcast, but for listeners, I would absolutely go and get yourself on there and listen to it. So I spent I was telling you, wasn't I, Nic? I spent like a week with you last week in my car, because my car automatically connects to Spotify. So every time I started the car, your voice popped up, and it was really quite funny, because I was like, oh, she's here again. But,
hello, Nic.
But actually, what wonderful, thought-provoking, easy to listen to content, I think, for people that just want to, you know, listen in and learn and get some thoughts percolated, because I have lots and I've wrote them in a book for you. which I'm going to share with you, and you can then do a million other podcasts on those things. So check that out as well. Neurotypicals do not juggle chainsaws. So Nic, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on our podcast. And thank you to all our listeners. If you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard today, please get in touch at info@ne-as.org.uk. You can also follow North East Autism Society on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram or LinkedIn. And the podcast, This is Autism, comes out each month, so please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And bye for now.